We're going to read the first mission of the fourth chapter, which was yesterday's chapter in Pirkei Avos. Ben Zoma Omer. Ben Zoma says. Ben Zoma, if you recall, is mentioned in the Haggadah. Rabbi Elazar ben Azariah, who was appointed to be the prince of Israel, is of the opinion that the obligation of Shema is not only once a day, it's twice a day. Once in the morning, once in the evening. But he wasn't able to bring a proof to his position. But that was his tradition. That was his Masorah. Until Ben Zoma had come, who was a colleague of his, and cited a verse in the Torah with an interpretation which proved the basis for his position. This is Ben Zoma. Ben Zoma is referred to, he's the son of his father. Seems to be he has no identity. Evidently he had a name. What was his name? His name was Shimon Ben Zoma. So why is he referred to Ben Zoma? Because since he died as a very young man and did not establish himself in terms of his own identity to indicate that he did not have a length of days, therefore he's always referred to by the son of his father. What does Ben Zoma say? Ezo Chacham, who is a wise man? Halomi b'kol adam, a person who could learn from anyone, regardless of your dimension of genius or the breadth of your knowledge. If you're able to learn from anyone, because of your desire for knowledge, ego doesn't in any way interfere with that ability to see that as an opportunity to increase your level of knowledge. That's a wise person. A wise person is a person who can learn from anyone, even from a child, even from an act, even from something in nature, even from an unintelligible creature. King Solomon was the wisest man who ever lived. And he tells us, if you want to learn zeal and alacrity, you should look at the industrious ant. How industrious the ant is. He doesn't stop. So you learn zeal from the ant. If you want to learn modesty, how to be modest, you should look at the behavior of a cat. A cat, when it does and it relieves itself, it does it in a very private location. Nobody else is around. That's modesty. God created within existence species, although it's instinctive, they're unintelligent species, but you're able to draw lessons from them and you're able to learn from their ways because we ourselves have that ability. It's within our genealogy that the same characteristics that you find in these various species, we could actually actualize those characteristics. The characteristic of zeal, the characteristic of modesty, as we'll see in a moment. We find later in Pirkei Avos, we read, you should be as fierce as a lion. You should be strong as a lion, as fierce as a leopard. I mean, how could you be as powerful as a lion? A lion is a lion. We're only limited mortals. We're not a match for a lion. We don't have the fierceness of a leopard. Nevertheless, within the human capacity, a person, although he doesn't actually sense that he has it within his potential, within the potential of human being, a person has that level of power and that level of fierceness to apply himself in certain situations. We're going to see in a moment, next statement is Ezo Gibor, HaKovish Yisro. Who is the powerful one? The one who's able to suppress his inclination, as we'll discuss in a moment. A person is inclined that he doesn't want to be because of his physicality. One doesn't want to be burdened. One doesn't want to be bothered. Although it's a situation where you should take initiative. So inclination says you should be passive. The inertia holds you back. But the person understanding the value of opportunity, it's within his ability. He was created with this power of choice that God gives him the inner strength that he's able to suppress that inclination despite his physicality and overcome it and take initiative and take advantage of that particular opportunity. But that's gvura, that's power. The way the human being displays power is by taking control of his life, despite all the inclinations are actually contrary to what that is. And the reason why his inclinations are contrary to it is because since our physicality is material and earthy and mundane, and it has no sense of the value of that opportunity, therefore you have this pushback, you have this inertia holding you back. But God endowed the human being with an ability, because that's within the realm of choice, that we're able to suppress that, and it's power. We say a person has willpower. What's willpower? That's what it's referred to. Willpower means that although naturally a person normally doesn't do this, he's able, because the will is the power. The will activates the power that you're able to suppress the inclination, which is the inertia, which is the pushback, which is the passivity of a human being not to exert himself, not to become bothered with whatever the issues may be. But we're speaking now, Ezo Chocham. Who is the wise man? One who is willing to learn from anyone. And it cites a verse in Tehillim, Shenemar Mikom Lamdi Skalti. From all those who taught me, I became wiser. David HaMelech, King David. And I always say, what do we attribute Moshe's greatness to? He was, no question, a tzaddik. There's no question he was a chassid. He was pious, scrupulously pious, devout beyond any human being's devoutness. His connection to God was one of a kind. He totally negated himself to God. How do you classify this man? He was the perfect human being. Perfect. How did he achieve all this? Well, he was a tzaddik. He was a chassid. No. The Torah tells us the secret. Onav b'kavodam. He was the most humble human being who ever walked the face of the earth. So why don't we very often take initiatives, even when it's beneficial? What is always the so-called the blockage, which causes us to see it differently? We don't appreciate the value of the moment because there's always the I. Because there's always, we feel it's an infringement. It's an infringement on us. But if a person himself doesn't see it as an infringement, then he's right there. For instance, if a person has a material opportunity and the person wants to succeed in life, materially speaking, because he has many needs, ego needs, physical needs, and he wants to address all those needs and satisfy those needs. When he sees opportunity and believes he has the ability to actualize that opportunity, nothing's stopping this person. Nothing's going to hold that person back. But all that is within the physical realm, because it's within the physical realm that plays right into the ego. That is the ego which drives the person. We find, idealism. Young people are very idealistic because they believe they have the ability to succeed, and that's what drives them. But as a result, very often, the lack of experience of life, understanding that they don't fully see all the pitfalls, very often they fail. But what drives them? What drives them is they believe they could do it. They have the confidence. A person walks on a thinly frozen river because he's confident he'll make it across. But it may be the worst decision the person ever made. It's only because of experience, not understanding what a thin layer of ice over a river means, that the moment you get out there, you fall through the ice because it's not thick enough to hold you. But what's this person's frame of reference? He has no frame of reference. It seems to be a solid covering, but he doesn't realize to be able to hold his weight, it has to have a certain thickness. Otherwise, he's going through. The person who's aware that people have gone through that or have seen it before or even experienced it, they will not take a chance. Because what is the ego? Ego doesn't mean you're foolish. Ego allows the person to believe that his understanding is correct. And he doesn't see the mistake that he may be making because he wants that, because he believes he could do that. But only when he knows he can't do that, or he's been burnt or hurt in the past, where he understands, and that's the whole idea of what, of experience of life, then the ego very often doesn't interfere. What's a fool? A fool's a person, he's been burnt, and he goes to get back again, makes the same mistake over and over again. We're supposed to learn from our mistakes. That's a person who's stupid. I don't want to use the word foolish, he's stupid. Even if you're egotistic, but you understand egotistic means because you believe that will somehow add to who you are. It'll advance who you are. But if it's not going to help you, where are you going? So the person who's foolish is the person you failed once, twice, 3 times, or you're going back for more failure. The answer is he's so foolish, he doesn't see that ultimately it's futility because he's been there before and eventually it may destroy him. A young person, we understand that's idealism. As you mature, so we see clearly opportunity only plays into our physicality when we understand or we believe that it's not contradictory to our physical existence, because we believe we'll be able to succeed. But the moment the person has clarity or a sense of clarity, that it's not worth it because the chance and the risk of the loss, they're not going there. As much as they want material, but they want to preserve their material, or they want to preserve their ego or the reputation. They're not doing it. They're not going to take that level of risk. That person's smart. The person foolish, he says, I'm willing to take that risk. So we see even within the physical, if a person understands it may put his physical into jeopardy, it will compromise his physical, it'll compromise his ego, because it's not going to reflect well on him, especially, or even if nobody knows it. It's his personal loss. He's only being driven because in his own mind, he believes that's what it's about. But if he understands he's not going anywhere with it, and it'll only diminish him and undermine him, he's not going to make that decision, and he has clarity on that. You have people in life, businessmen, literally, they don't miss a beat. When it comes to business, they do not miss a beat. And they're always there, and their decisions are always accurate. In their personal lives, disastrous. Every decision they make in their personal life, disastrous decisions. Why? Because the focus and the acuity, when it comes to the material, which is the business, which they believe that is the essence of their life, on there, they're not taking any chance. They don't, because they don't value the other aspects of their life. And that's why we live today. It's called one niche societies. One niche society. People, then one niche. In this area, they're outstanding. Whether it's a rainmaker, whether it's a singer, whatever the person is. But any other area other than that niche, disastrous. The lives are disastrous. The character is appalling. Everything is disastrous. But what's a chocham? A chocham surpasses the physical. If I could learn, I'm there to learn. Doesn't make a difference. Yikom lamdei skalti. So Rabbeinu Yonah over here in his commentary writes that he says the wise men of the nations of the world say that a person who knows nothing, but he has a desire to become wiser and learn it, although at this point he knows nothing, his classification is chocham, is wise. Why? He's like a wise child. What does he know? He's wise because he understands opportunity. And ultimately, with that perspective, someday he's going to be something special. Because of that perspective, that's a wise child. A person who believes he knows it all, that person is a fool. Why? Because since there's so much to know, and it's an endless area, knowledge is endless, and if a person believes he knows it all, the man's a fool. The child who knows nothing is wise, because ultimately, because of that desire and that drive and the perspective, he will become that special person, because he's not going to miss anything. He will see every opportunity in the area of advancing himself knowledge-wise. The other person, he believes that knowledge is limited, and it's not important no more. He says the man's a fool. That's the difference. But that's what the wise men of the nations of the world say. But we say, what David HaMelech says, Reishis Chochmah Yiras Hashem. What is the prerequisite to wisdom? Fear of God. Reishis Chochmah Yiras Hashem. Seichel Tov L'chol Oseim. We said every morning, we have to say the Modani. You say, Reishis Chochmah, the beginning of wisdom is what? Is fear of God. Fear of God is also wisdom. Why is fear of God wisdom? So I'd mentioned in the past, who was the first human being to acknowledge God as master of the universe? Avraham Avinu. Now, how did he come upon this reality, understanding God as the master? Because he looked at the universe and he sees a magnificent universe, something which is unimaginable to come about unless there is a benefactor. There is a power that brought all this into existence. He wants to know who brought all this existence, this ingenious, unlimited, infinite, relatively speaking existence, in terms of the human being himself, in terms of the location where this human being was put, what's beyond the human being, who created all this, how did it come about? That was his question. And his level of inquisitiveness, his drive and thirst to get the answer, he did not leave a stone unturned. This drove him his whole life. And according to the Midrash, this question already at the age of 3 plagued him, and he unrelentlessly, he came upon the truth. God is the master. Now, how's God the master? So I always share experiences with that professed atheist many years ago, which used to have all the interactions with him. And he says to me, he needs empirical evidence. Without empirical evidence, it doesn't work by him. So that there's this and there's that, and whatever it is, it's not enough to convince him that there's a God. Okay? So I said to him, you have questions, and because of your questions, you've come to the conclusion there's no God. But you realize, although you have questions and you have no answer, I may have 20 answers for your questions, which you're unaware of. So just because you have no answer doesn't mean to say there's no answer out there. There are answers. People are more knowledgeable than you are. They may have the answer. But if I don't have the answer, the question becomes the answer. Because of my question, that's a confirmation there's no God. Until I'm convinced beyond doubt that there is a God. How much have you searched for that answer? Well, I spoke to a handful of people, and based on what I think, that my conclusion is none. But well, what kind of conclusion is that? It's not a valid conclusion, because there may be endless answers to your question. And I said, maybe I have the answer for your question. So how do you come to make that kind of conclusion? It's very interesting. You meet a person on the street who is a Jew, and he has some relevance to his Jewish identity, and you ask him, I'm totally ignorant about Judaism. Could you tell me something about Judaism? And the person keeps you there for 2 hours, explain to you his perspective of Judaism. Okay? So you say to the person, by the way, it seems to be a very well-versed, and your position is very strong. How much have you studied Judaism? He says, I've never studied it, but I know I'm a Jew, and this is my sense of what it's all about. And he keeps you there for 2 hours, convincingly that this is what it's about. It's supposed to be ethical and moral and decent and honest, and that's what it's all about. How do you know? Maybe it's so much more than that. But the person believes that's what it is. It may be part of it, but that's not what it's all about. But how much have you studied? How could you offer an opinion of what it is? It's like a person says, there's a machine, and you have to put a code into this machine to get the machine to activate it. He says, the person says, you need a code to activate the machine. Thank you. But but do you know the code? No. So what are you telling me? You're telling me nothing. I'm locked out. But yet that same person, you say, by the way, I need somebody who has a cardiac problem. Could you tell me exactly how to do the procedure, the surgery, the open heart surgery? He says, I'm not a doctor. Maybe I'll do some research and find you a doctor. I could advise you to who to go to. But myself, I have no idea. So areas which a person believes he has no relevance to, he wouldn't have the audacity even to suggest some type of approach how to do the procedure. But an area which he believes Judaism is all what you believe it to be. So therefore, with confidence, with a lack of arrogance, he's offering you his perspective of Judaism. Why? Because he believes that's where it begins, that's where it ends. And you don't need more than that. So just because you have your questions, you don't have your answers, that's not a confirmation that there's no God. Because maybe I could give you, as I said, maybe I have 10 answers for every one of your questions. Avram Avinu came to the conclusion that there's a God because he had questions. And unrelenting, it drove him. He entered into all kinds of dialogues with all the leading minds of the generation. They had answers, but they didn't satisfy his question. But even though they didn't satisfy his question, but still, how could the conclusion be there's a God? Maybe there were other answers which these people didn't come up with. So how did Avram, through his unrelenting search, did he come upon God? The answer is he never came upon God himself. He didn't figure it out. The Midrash tells us he saw a citadel. The equivalent, let's say you have a citadel, 10,000 rooms. Each room is furnished. Each room is illuminated. And he looks at the citadel. Everything is perfectly in place. And it's magnificent. And he calls out, who is the master of the citadel? No answer. And he keeps calling out, who is the master of the citadel? And as much as other people say, we are the master, he rejects it because he knows they're not the master. And unrelentingly, he keeps asking this question. For the sake of the quest of truth, he does not compromise on that. And he keeps calling out the question, who is the master of the citadel? Until God himself says, I am the master. So Avram did not figure it out because he wasn't willing to compromise a standard of truth, to succumb to an answer which is not the answer. God says, if that's the case, you're worthy that the source of all truth should reveal what truth is. That's how Avram came upon God. So Avram came upon God, but he didn't figure it out. He only knew one thing. There's a master. Who is this master? One master, two, he had no idea. But whatever the answers were, they did not suffice to satisfy his question. As I always say, the person asks a question and then you give him an answer. Person says, I could live with that answer. Avram wasn't willing to live with an answer. He wanted the answer. It was so annoying and so all-consuming. He cannot tolerate the overwhelming question, who is my benefactor? And when he was consumed by that pain of not being able to recognize and acknowledge that and not willing to compromise for the sake of that, God says, I am the master. We find something interesting. I once said that Avram was circumcised at the age of 99. And the third day of circumcision, Avram Avinu, he was no youngster, and he was infirm, and he had to recover. So God, for the sake of Avram, that he shouldn't be beleaguered with hospitality, because he was the ultimate host. The host per excellence is an understatement who Avram Avinu was. God caused it should be the hottest day since the beginning of existence. Nobody would leave his tent on that day. Avram, the Torah tells us, is sitting at the entrance of his tent. And he's turning in all directions. And he's pained. Why is he pained? No wayfarers. No wayfarers to host. And Hashem says, I only caused it should be the hottest day of existence to give him some respite so he should be able to recover. But here, the not being able to host guests is greater pain than the recovery from the circumcision. So he sends 3 angels in human form, and he's not aware that these are angels. He believes they're mortals and they have needs. He immediately sees them, he runs towards them, prostrates himself, and he begs them to accept his hospitality. And he says a number of things. Rest under the shade of my tree, take water and wash your feet. And he says, I will give you a morsel of bread to satisfy your hunger. Those are the three things he said. Then it says he ran, he slaughtered 3 calves to give them tongue, and so on and so forth. He told his wife, need bread. And this is the story. It turns out later that each one, they told him something, that his Sorah is going to have a child, and so on and so forth. So the Midrash tells us, in the merit of offering the shade of his tree to these angels, the Jewish people, the 40 years we were in the desert, we merited the clouds of glory. In the merit of the water that he offered for them to wash their feet, we merited the wellspring of Miriam. In the merit of the bread, we merited the manna for 40 years. And the manna was much more than just satisfying our physical needs. The Midrash tells us, Lo nidu Torah lo ochle aman. The man itself was absorbed in their inner organs. There was no waste. It was really spiritual food that was given to them in the physical form, but in terms of what it touched them and what it nourished them, it nourished their spirituality. And as a result of that, they had a greater grasp capacity to understand godliness and Torah. Lo nid Torah el ochle aman. Now, so why did we merit every one of these exceptional gifts? The clouds of glory is the divine presence, protected him from all the elements, but it's much more than that. It's like being the holy of holies for 40 years, being exposed to those intense level of God's presence. The wellspring wasn't just water. It also spiritualized them. It was miraculous water, miracle water. And then the manna. Why? Why did we merit it? Because Avram was pained that there were no guests coming. So we asked, Avram had allocated a certain amount of his money for hospitality, and therefore the money was burning a hole in his pocket. Is that why he was pained? Or Avram was pained that because these people were all pagans, and here you have a world that is God's world, God is the benefactor, and who are they offering their homage to, or homage to some deity? So every moment, Avram's pain is beyond our understanding, because he's paying for God's glory, that God is being desecrated every moment. These people are offering their homage to a deity when God's the master. But if it's the hottest day of the year and he's not able to interact and enter into dialogue, he's not able to turn these people to monotheists, because there was never a dialogue that he entered into that the end result was that he didn't convince these people about monotheism. So what drove Avram? What drove him was his pain for God's glory, what we call for kavod shamayim. That's what drove Avram. So because he was pained for kavod shamayim, for God's glory, God says, I will give you the ultimate glory. We merited the clouds of glory. We merited the wellspring, which advanced his descendants to a level which they wouldn't have been advanced unless they were exposed to the clouds of glory, the wellspring of Miriam, and the manna. But again, Avram Avinu was pained. What Avram Avinu, his level of clarity and purity and dedication to God, because he felt being such a beneficiary, and God is his benefactor, and understands that he cannot tolerate this desecration of offering the thanks to someone and worshiping someone other than the master himself. But that was the essence of Avram Avinu. So what drove Avram to truth? What drove the world? His level of dedication to God himself, or initially to truth, that he wasn't willing to compromise truth. A person who truly has a thirst for knowledge. Knowledge means you eventually, because of your drive and your level, your capacity, you learn from everyone, regardless, greater than you, lesser than you, doesn't make a difference. Today you know nothing, but ultimately you'll have a vast array of knowledge. and it'll continue to grow. But as a result of that, ultimately, you're going to come upon truth, which is Yiras Shamayim. You will come and understand, by understanding what exists out there, and you'll understand it cannot be through anyone other than God himself to bring that about. You will have Yiras Shamayim. That will cause you to fear God. And that's Reishis Chacham Yiras Hashem. This is Rabbeinu Yonah. That thirst for truth will bring about a level of understanding due to your experiences in life that you say it can't be unless there's a God. That always confirms and solidifies and strengthens your position. Once had a discussion with our friendly atheist, and he said to me, we were sitting, and he's asked me a question. He says, let me ask you, if I would be able to ask you a question, which would prove my position, would you agree to retract and accept my position that there's no God? That's the question he asked me. If there's a question I ask you and you can't answer the question. So I said to him, I want to explain you something. The difference between me and you. Everything's dependent on empirical evidence. So you understand, you accept, or you have to understand well enough, otherwise you don't accept. That's where I'm coming from. The basis for my belief is there were nearly 4,000 years ago, there was an event at Sinai. And our tradition is, factually, there were a few million Jews there. And God communicated with every one of them in a wake state. And he revealed to them all aspects of truth. And this was transmitted from father to son until today. Where I'm coming from fact. It's not something I figured out. It's fact. If I put my hand in fire, fire burns. I know it burns because it burned my hand. If millions of people have a tradition and they witnessed and experienced something, and everyone gives over the exact, accurate experience, and this is passed from generation to generation, I'm coming from fact. What I understand only confirms and strengthens that fact, because I have proofs, many proofs, that if you keep your eyes wide open, you understand things can't happen unless that truth is fact. So even if you ask me a question, which I can't answer, I may be able to answer the question, but it doesn't change the fact, because my fact is rooted in my tradition, not in my understanding. Do you understand why your heart has 4 chambers? You don't understand why, but it's a reality. Well, you can't answer that question. Does that change the reality that your heart has 4 chambers? It's a reality. That God exists and God is the master and there's divine providence and nothing is random. How do I know that? Because 4 million Jews at Sinai, God openly communicated and revealed to them who he was, that he's the master. And every moment he wills this existence as he chooses to. That's where I'm coming from. What I understand only confirms that. So even though you may ask me this question today, the question doesn't in any way affect my belief, which is rooted in my tradition. That's what I said to him. You reject the tradition, you don't give value to tradition. It's all you. It begins with you, ends with you. So unless you have that empirical evidence, you don't believe. Because you're giving up too much. You're not willing to give up unless you understand that you must give up. So many years later, I was at his office, and we no longer sparred afterwards. Because I realized I was wasting my time with him, and he realized he's not getting away with me. So we were sitting in the office, and I was there with another person, not going to mention names, this person and his son, and I was there with someone else. And he puts out a question to the group. What do you think about homosexuality? Yeah, this question he asked me, this other rabbi and his son, and there was somebody with me. So I say to him, before he wants an answer, I say, Mike, what do you think? He says, it's not my cup of tea. That's what he says. It's not my cup of tea. Meantime, these other people there, they're afraid to answer because since they have the hand in his pocket, if they don't give the right answer, it may jeopardize how deep they could put their hand in his pocket. I thank God never put my hand in his pocket. So he says, Rabbi, what do you say? I say it's an abomination because the Torah says it's an abomination. It has nothing with my evaluation. If God says it's an abomination because relationship in this area has to be between man and woman, not man and man, it's an abomination. Once I said that and they saw that I was in safe territory, all of a sudden they piped up because they realized by saying the same thing, so the person quotes chapter and verse, they also agree. So I say to this person, I say, I'm proud of you. You're consistent. Since you don't believe in God, why aren't you involved? Why don't you favor homosexuality? He said, it's not your cup of tea. You're consistent. I'm consistent because I told you right away it's the abomination. And it's irrelevant what you think because that's my tradition and that's your tradition, whether you accept it or not. And that's where it is. A person who has a quest for and a thirst for wisdom, ultimately, and he's not willing to delude himself, to accept something as fact unless it is fact, ultimately he will come to truth. And that truth will cause him to fear God. Because Reishis Chochem Yiras Hashem, because the root, the prerequisite for wisdom is fear of God. Because otherwise you get convoluted. Because your conflicts of interest don't allow you to come upon truth, because there's always that conflict that you're trying to inflate your ego to put it across, but it may not be. Rav Chaim Volozhin explains, why is fear called Yira? In Hebrew, Yira is fear. Fear of heaven. What's fear of heaven? So he explains that if a person, the word Yira also means to see. If you see, then you're fearful. If a person sees a lion about to attack him, he's fearful because he knows he's going to be attacked. A person, God forbid, is blind, and the lion's right before about to pounce on him. There's no fear, unless maybe he hears the roar of the lions and is getting close enough and he has a sense of what the lion is. But the one who sees, he's fearful, and he runs for his life, or he becomes he has a meltdown. He's paralyzed with fear. If a person sees and understands the interaction between God and the world, that if the world itself goes too much to the extreme left and they reject him, and God is actually going to withdraw, and that withdrawing will cause tremendous suffering and retribution, understanding that, you have fear. You behave yourself. So that when you see that, seeing is understanding, and understanding causes fear, because that allows you to live as a responsible human being. That's why fear is called Yira. In Hebrew, Yira means to see, for that reason. And that's why, as I pointed out many times, it says, Ezo Chocham Haroes Hanolad. Who is the wise man, the one who sees the ramifications of events? He sees it. Doesn't say he understands it. Doesn't say Ezo Chocham HaMevines Hanolad. Haroe. Roe, seeing is believing. When you see something, you cannot convince a person that he didn't see it when he did see it. But when you understand something, you say, well, maybe your understanding is not exactly correct because maybe you could see it differently. So there you could be more easily swayed or convinced. It's not as you understood it. But a person who's wise, he sees it. Ezo Chocham HaRoeh. Roeh means it's fact. Fact, you don't change from fact, because seeing is believing. That's concrete reality. I always tell over the story, made up the story. His father builds a phenomenal business, sends his son to Harvard Business School. I'm not telling you who wrote the paper to get him in there, but he succeeded. Goes to Harvard Business School, graduates with honors, and he believes that he's going to take his father's very successful business, which he built for 50 years, and he's going to take it to another level. And he comes into the office. First day he meets with his father, and he gives him his whole plan of how he's going to take this to another level. The father listens, smiles. He realizes son may know has book knowledge, but experience, what it is all about, although he has textbook experience, but reality, if he would allow him to take the helm, the business will not last more than 3 months. He'll take it off the cliff. So good, but he tolerates his son. He's willing to give him a chance. His son brings a perspective, an opportunity, an investment opportunity. So he puts it on his father's desk. His father, already needed reading glasses after all the years, puts the glass to the tip of his nose, looks at it. He had a waste can right by his desk, just pushes it in, goes right into the waste can. The son is insulted. Dad, I have all this education. You never had my education. What are you just throwing the waste can? It's insulting. He said, you don't understand, son. You've never been through, I've been through the thick and thin of business. With just a glance, I could tell you it's disastrous because I know what it is all about. You haven't experienced failure. Nothing is 100%. What I see, you don't see, because I have the experience of life, and I didn't build this out of a vacuum. I built this with making mistakes, and from my mistakes, I learned. Therefore, I was able to advance myself, and that's what wisdom is. Wisdom is when you learn from your mistakes. One's mind, a human being's knowledge and capacity is not perfect. It only gets more perfect when you learn from your mistakes. So if a person increases his knowledge base, we say ignorance is bliss. My father, there's an expression in Yiddish that you find a person's a fool. He doesn't prematurely gray. And a person's already in his late 60s, he still has black hair or dark hair. They say, why? Because ignorance is bliss. Man has no worries in life. That's the reason. But once you have an understanding of what life is, and you understand it's not so simple, as we say, life is not a bowl of cherries, far from a bowl of cherries. And really, you got to pull yourself up from your bootstraps, and you have to be cognizant, and you have to take opportunity to study and learn. Mikom lamti iskalti. David says, if I could learn, I learn from everyone. Therefore, what's interesting? Eichmann, Yemach Shmo v'zichro. He was one of the architects of the Holocaust. He killed close to 1 million Jews in a year, the Hungarian Jewry. In a year, he killed over 900,000 Jews. Yemach Shmo Eichmann. And when they finally captured him, and they had him in the safe house in Buenos Aires, and they had him chained to a bed, so he told over his story to his captors. They were Mossad people. And he said that in the 30s, he had gone to Yerushalayim, to Jerusalem, it was Palestine, to just get a glance and understanding of the Jewish community. In Israel, he did his homework. He already saw Jews in Europe, in Eastern Europe, in Western Europe. He wanted to get a full global view of Jews. So he went to Palestine. That's where it all began. He was evil, demonic, beyond, thank God, beyond, we can't fathom how evil he was. But factually, before he constructed and participated in creating the final solution, he did his homework. It's not, I hate Jews, he's an anti-Semite. Methodically, he did it with such precision, cursed that your name should be forever in hell, but he did it. Everything you need wisdom. Nothing comes, as they say, you can't shoot from the hip. You have to shoot with accuracy, with understanding. You have to be trained. Lahavdil elef abdolus. Mikom lamda iskalti. I've learned, if I could learn from anyone, I learn from anyone. But ultimately, if you follow that path of truth, and you have a quest for truth and to gain knowledge, ultimately, you're going to come to Yiras Hashem, to fear of God, and you'll have clarity. And therefore, it's Ezu Chochem Harosa Nolad. And the more wise you become, the more you see how valuable that knowledge is. Person is a very wealthy man. It's worth billions. And there's a deep flawless diamond worth $40 million on the ground. Is he going to pick it up? Of course he'll pick it up. But he's worth billions. Is it really going to make a difference? Doesn't make a difference. If that has that value, he's picking it up because it has value. The more wise you become, the greater clarity you have. The greater clarity you have, the more you value that wisdom. And as a result of that, you become wiser. And it feeds on itself. The person who doesn't have wisdom, he's in the dark. Among Jews, there was never a dark age. The world experienced a dark age. Jews never had a dark age. We always had it. We always understood it. Many years ago, when there was an old community in Yerushalayim, which was mostly Sephardic, and in the 18th century, they were the students of Vilna Gaon. They had gone to Yerushalayim. They were in Yerushalayim, they were in Tveria and Tzfat, three communities. And they suffered tremendous hardships. There was nothing there. And in the 1800s, the Haskalah, or the Reform movement, they opened schools in Yerushalayim. Jewish education, the 1800s. But then what the community that existed was called Yishuv HaYashan. It was the old community of Jerusalem. And the chief rabbi's name was Shmuel Salant. He was the chief rabbi of the old community. And you had these people coming from Germany, and they opened schools. They had beards, but they would walk in the street bareheaded. And this German teacher, professor, whatever he was, he meets this Yerushalmi little boy, must have been 10 years old. And they spoke Hebrew, either because they're from the Enlightenment and they pride themselves they spoke Hebrew, and or they were Yiddishists, but they didn't believe in anything. So the little boy asks this middle-aged gentleman in Hebrew, Eifu ha-kippah shelcha, in Hebrew, where's your kippah? He's bareheaded. Eifu ha-kippah shelcha. So he says, the sky in Hebrew is called kippat ha-shamayim. It's like a dome. So he says, I don't need a kippah. The kippat ha-shamayim is my kippah. The sky is my kippah, because the term is kippah. So he says in Yiddish to this man, you have such a small head, what do you need such a big yarmulke for? That's what the kid said to this middle-aged man. The little kid, 10 years old, had more brains than this middle-aged man. The kippah hashamayim, yarmulke. Such a small head with such a big yarmulke. Didn't become kippah, okay? You understand? You want to delude yourself, you want to whatever it is. But sometimes a little child can make you feel like a fool. You know, you can get away with it with other people. You know, there's a story, Rabbi Chanan Wasserman, Zecher Tzaddik Livrocha, he was the closest student of the Chofetz Chaim, and he was murdered by the Nazis in the Kovna fort, and he spent 2 years in the United States. And he went back knowing that he'd probably be killed, because he felt as a leader he had to lead his flock. So he was a very fierce person, and like the Chofetz Chaim, he voiced his position, his opinion. And he comes to the United States, he sees here, it's disastrous. You know, the Reform movement was the primary power. The conservative move was just began budding, and the Orthodox community was low man on the totem pole. And he saw how falsehood was actually rearing its head. And he wrote an article. They asked him to write an article in the Jewish Forward. And in those days, the Forward, most of the writers were atheists. They were Yiddishists. And people said to him, you know, you have to be careful. If you write in that paper, you know, they may not print exactly what you're writing. They may alter it. They'll take certain things out. So he wrote the article, and he did. And he regretted that he wrote it. But afterwards, he wanted to make a public statement. And then Warburg and Schiff, who were bankers in the United States, they were Jews, they were Reform Jews, and they supported much of the infrastructure of the Jewish community, the hospitals, Jewish orphanages, and they were important people. So they said to Rabbi Wasserman, Zecher Tzaddik Livrocha, you realize you say something, you offend them, you may put that financial backing in jeopardy, because we need these people. So Rabbi Chanan Wasserman said to the people who brought this up, he says, you know, there's a question which is asked. If you believe in God, why did God create crazy people? That's the question. What's the value of a person who's demented? He's off, is an expression we used to use. Raving maniac. He's a raving maniac. What's the value? He says the reason why God created demented, crazy people, because a crazy person will say something that a normal person will not say, but it's the truth. A crazy person will say the truth, but a normal person, because he's concerned of the reaction and the consequence, will not see it, will not say it. He says, I will be the crazy person. I'll be the demented person. I will say what has to be said, regardless, because nobody else is going to tell these people what they are and what they're not. They aren't. So, but what is that? A person who truly is chocham, he wants truth. He's not willing to compromise truth, regardless of the consequences. If the basis for the statement is because without that, truth is going to be totally snuffed out. We find Moshe Rabbeinu. Why did he kill the Egyptian? You don't think Moshe Rabbeinu knew that it may be found out he may have to flee for his life? As it says, before he killed the Egyptian, he looked in all directions, make sure no one was looking. Then he buried him. Unfortunately, there were 2 Jews who informed on him. You don't think he knew that humanly it's possible? The word may get out, and if the word gets out, what happens? He has to flee. But you understand, Moshe Rabbeinu was a man of truth. A man of truth doesn't compromise truth, regardless of the consequences. And what happened? He had to flee from Egypt for 60 years. Regardless, and where did he go? He went to Midian. He arrives in Midian. What happens? He sees women shepherdess that water flocked, and all of a sudden they're attacked. What does he do? He enters into the fray, fights them off, and waters their flock. You're a fugitive. The Egyptians, they're looking for you. The tentacles are all over the world. Don't you realize you're putting yourself right back into jeopardy again? The answer is Moshe was a man of truth. A man of truth does not compromise truth on any circumstance. Nachi, you have to silence it. You have to, okay.
Yeah,
a man of truth does not compromise truth. You have to silence it. Nachi.
I'm working on it.
And therefore, Moshe Rabbeinu, why did he merit to be the conduit for the ultimate truth? Because he never compromised truth. Moshe emes v'toroso emes. Moshe is truthful and his Torah is truthful. A person who truly seeks wisdom, B'kom lam lehiskalti. David HaMelech could only make that statement is because he was the 3rd most humble person who ever walked the face of the earth. For him, ego wasn't an issue. If I'm able to what? To learn, I'll learn even from a child, even from an ant, even from the cat. Doesn't make a difference. And this is Ezeu Chocham Halomi B'Kol Adam. Just tell you a personal story. My father, Olav Shalom, he had an automotive warehouse on the Lower East Side. And there was times that sometimes his workers, and he had deliveries, and sometimes the workers didn't show up, and he had to make the delivery himself. So he goes, they didn't know who the owner of the company was, because my brother, he was the salesman, so they never saw my father. But my father was the business, the brains of the business, the money of the business, he was the business. And he goes, makes the delivery, and the person gives him a tip. Nachi, you gotta shut it. You have to shut it off. And he goes, and the person gives him a tip. So he comes back. So my brother says, did the man tip? He says, yeah. He says, you took a tip. You're the boss. My father says, therefore what? They give me the tip, I take the tip. You don't understand. You know, if it's knowledge, you take it, regardless from who. Doesn't make a difference who you can learn from. That's just a parallel to this. Okay. You had to understand, Alan knew my father, Baruch Hashem, a little bit. Came from the old school, as they say. Ezeu Gibor, Hakov Shesitzro. Who is the powerful one? You know, Arnold Schwarzenegger, right? What does he look like? Lifted, what did he lift? 1,000 pounds. I don't know what he lifted. But God says that's not a gibor. That's not a powerful person. A powerful person is not the one who has physical brute strength. The person who takes control of his life. He could suppress his inclination. No, it's interesting. You read in the Mishlei, Proverbs, or in Tehillim, you have a lion. A lion's ferocious. You have a rhinoceros also. Now, how do you capture these creatures? In terms of brute strength, not a match. So how do you capture them? You have to outwit them. Because therefore, with human ingenuity, you come up with a strategy how to trap these animals. So despite how strong they are, it doesn't mean anything. The human being dictates existence because he's endowed with wisdom, with intelligence. These animals don't have intelligence. Whatever they have is instinctive behavior. So if you're able to somehow bypass and use human ingenuity, you take control and you control them. So as you can control the lion and you control creatures which are beyond human capacity, the human being himself is an animal. God endows the human being with ingenuity, how to control that animal. But you need tremendous power for that. You need tremendous understanding of the detriment and the consequence of doing the wrong thing. Why does a person suppress his inclination? Person has a desire. Person has a problem with ulcers. And he knows whenever he eats certain foods, he writhes in pain. But every time when he's exposed to that, he can't control himself. And he always has the what? He pays the price. Sometimes he has to go to the emergency room. But if you know why, the answer is, although he understands, he doesn't appreciate the consequence until, God forbid, it actually may put him into jeopardy or put him in a level of pain that he can't tolerate. But if he remembers that pain and understands the consequence of the past, he's not going back there. But he has this overwhelming desire. But as they say in English, it's not worth it. Person has, he wants to buy himself that home and that Rolls Royce. And he wants to be written up. And he holds up a bank. He's foolish. It's not worth it. Because you're not going to succeed. And you may be written up, but not the way you want to be written up. That's the way it's going to be. So who's the gibor? The man says, but the desire was so overwhelming. All my friends succeed in their lives. I can't. I have to live up to the Joneses. But you realize, but if you be strong and you take control of your life, you wouldn't allow that to cause you to be so deluded and not understanding that your behavior is totally unacceptable. So the gibor is what is the kofish yitzro. Where is it? Where is this displayed? There's a midrash at the beginning of the book of Vayikra. We're almost finishing Vayikra this coming week. It's my bar mitzvah parsha and Alan's bar mitzvah parsha. Bar b'chukosai. Okay? Alan is going to be 23. I'm going to be 24 this coming Shabbos. So what happens is we speak about in Bahar about the sabbatical year. So there's a pasuk in Tehillim which speaks about Gibori Koach Osedvoro, those who have enormous strength and they do God's will. They do God's will. So the Midrash says, Hua Gibori Koach, those who observe the sabbatical year. Why they Gibori Koach? Why they have this enormous strength? Because the Torah says that 6 years you plant your field, you harvest your crop, so on and so forth. The 7th year comes, all the produce is ownerless. Any person has a right to come into your field without permission and take the produce. That's the produce of the sabbatical year. So the Midrash says, could you imagine? A person puts his capital investment, his sweat and blood for 6 years. The field is protected with fences. The 7th year comes. The fences come down. Everybody comes. All your creation is taken. And you stand by and you have to watch it and you cannot say a word. You're not permitted to say a word. You're not permitted to intervene. And you can't stop anybody because you want to get the majority. You could take like anyone else could take. But you can't protect your crop and not let people take or take less than they would have taken. But how's this possible? How could a person tolerate this? Your sweat and blood, what you created now just goes up in smoke. It's being literally squandered. It's being plundered. You know what the answer is? Ezeu Gibar HaKovish Yitzro. Who is the powerful one? The one who suppresses his inclination. Inclination is you react. You will not allow it. But if you're powerful, you're strong, you suppress that inclination and you let it happen. And that's what David HaMelech is referring to. Gibori koach oset varo. Those who with enormous strength, they do his will. To do the will of God is not so simple. I once mentioned, I think one of the people bought the book, All for the Boss. There was a person's name was Mr. Herman. And he lived his life. He was a furrier. He was a wealthy man. And he would do unbelievable acts of hospitality. This is the 30s, the 20s, the 30s, and in the late 40s. And he had special sons-in-law. They were literally leading Torah sages. He sent his sons-in-law to study in Europe, and he underwrote them because he valued all that. Although he didn't have any background. He came over as a 9-year-old child to the United States from Europe. And he says to his wife, no, we're ready to move to Israel. This is in the late 40s. In the 40s, it was before the founding of the state, mid-40s. So to go to Israel in those years, you had to take a boat to Cairo. And then afterwards, you had to have everything transported from Egypt to Israel or to Palestine. And he was a wealthy man. So his wife, all her dishes and all her silverware and all her bedding and all the artifacts of their life, which it was quality, that impacted the crates. And it was put on the boat docks in Cairo. The stevedores come, they unload the crates. In those days, the British were in control and power, Palestine and Egypt. And there were British sentries protecting the port, because unless it was protected, they have people coming, they'd steal everything. So here, they unload their crates, all their worldly belongings, 2 hours before Shabbos. You understand? So, Mr. Herman says, and they had a reservation at a hotel in Cairo where they're going to stay. And the British sentry says to them, I want to tell you people something. Unless you take this and transport it somewhere else, you come back tomorrow night, you will not find everything. It's all going to be plundered and stolen. So Mr. Herman says to his wife and says to the sentry, all for the boss. I'm an observant Jew. I observe the Sabbath. I will not violate it for anything in the world. And if it's plundered, then that's his will, let it be plundered. His wife breaks down crying. She's destroyed. All her life's recollections, everything in moments is gone. And here they packed it so well to bring, and they were going to live out their years here. And it's not going to be a trace of the past. She's totally devastated. He says to his wife, it's all for the boss. Let's go to the hotel. Come Saturday night, they went back to the dock, and that same sentry was standing there watching over the crates of all their worldly belongings. And he said to Mr. Herman, he says, a man who demonstrated and professed such absolute faith, no matter what, he's not violating the word of the God because it's all for the boss. I stood here, would not allow a person to even approach your worldly belongings. And everything's intact for you to take. That's the story. You understand? But how? You have everything is going to go up in smoke in moments. Ezo Gibor HaKovish Yisro. You know what kind of power you need for this? Just this one time. I'll do tshuva. I'll give charity. We have every answer, every approach. No answers. The answer is no. Just end with one thing. There was a person His name was Nachshon Waxman, Olav Shalom. He was murdered by the terrorists in Yerushalayim. And he was an IDF soldier. He was 18, 19 years old. His parents lived in Har Nof. Came from an observant family, and he was observant. And everybody was praying for him throughout the world. And finally, they broke in where he was being kept by the terrorists, and they found out they tortured him to death. Even when everybody was praying, he already was killed by the terrorists, and they killed the terrorists. So a secular correspondent interviewed the mother. You know, she was a woman, goes with her hair covered, devout woman. The woman then, she was maybe in her early 50s. And they said to Mrs. Waxman, so what do you say? Here you pray to God. Look what happened to your son. Right? Why didn't God answer you? She says, God did answer me. The answer was no. That was that was his answer. And that's it. God has a right to do whatever he wants. He could have said yes, but his answer was no. Therefore, I have no questions. It's all for the boss. Mr. Herman, it's in garbage smoke, my whole life's accomplishment. The answer is whatever the boss wants, all for the boss. This was such a sanctification of God's name that even this English Gentile century, and I'm sure he was a hardened person, he was a soldier, it pierced his heart, melted his heart, and therefore he stayed for 24 hours watching it to make sure everything was returned. But to be able to display that inner strength, that is the Gibor. It's not the person physically, what you're able to move. He moves mountains. This person moves mountains. Of course, all the inner workings of existence is dependent on the one who's the strong person. The strong person is, he addresses the objective creation is to take control over your life and do what God wants you to do. To be continued.
Thank you, Rabbi.
Thank you, Rabbi.
Okay.
Off at 11.
11 o'clock, Daf. Yes.